Hello and welcome, I'm ELD, and these are all the red cards from Kaldheim. Full spoiler review. We're starting out with Arnie Broken Bow. At 3 mana, he's a 3/3 haste, which is phenomenal stat lines, and he has Boast on top of it. You can pay 1 and change his base power to 1, plus the greatest power among other creatures you control until end of turn. You're definitely going to be sleeving that up if you are playing red, and you may be playing red specifically to play this card. It is very aggressive, and in general, you're going to want some of your rares to be playable in pre-release, and I would not feel bad about this one. This will get some matches done pretty quickly. I am going to be taking a look at this in terms of your pre-release decisions, also impact on Pauper, Legacy, Commander, not as much other formats, Vintage a little bit. I mean, I don't expect anything for Vintage really, but that is generally the slant that I look at new sets with. And, you know, kitchen table magic as well, if you have something that's really fun in a 4-of format with kind of no restrictions. So Axeguard Cavalry, 2 mana for a 2/2. You can tap it to give target creature haste until end of turn. Is reasonable. You know, you got a 2/2 for 2, which is fine, not overwhelming, but that's generally going to be part of what you're doing with pre-releases, is having kind of a nice mana curve and being able to contest things early. You don't want to fall behind 6 or 8 points of life because you don't have anything going on for those first few turns. And the Axeguard Cavalry can be part of that. And later on, it is actually pretty helpful to be able to give a creature flying, whether it has haste, whether it has evasion and will be able to get in there for lethal, or even just if it's a big fat creature, just having it show up out of nowhere can create some very difficult blocks for your opponent. Basalt Ravager, 4 casting, cost 4/2. When it enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to any target, where X is the greatest number of creatures you control that have a creature type in common. So this is going to be murdering the changelings that we've seen. And, you know, creatures that kill other creatures are very, very solid. This one's pretty conditional, but along with your changelings, like this could potentially be quite solid. And I mean, Flametongue Kavu is one of the best creatures of all time for limited. It was a 4 casting, cost 4/2. That when it ETBs, it would do 4 damage to target creature. That was literally vintage playable. So under the right circumstances, this could be very powerful, and that'll probably require either your opponent happens to play a changeling or you intentionally play a bunch of changelings. Either of those are possible at the pre-release weekend. Birgi, God of Storytelling, a 3 mana 3/3. Again, really solid stat lines there. Whenever you cast a spell, you add a red, and until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as spells and phases end. As well, creatures you control can boast twice during each of their turns rather than once. So again, a solid role player, can create a lot of card advantage, but is also a very valid threat on its own. 3/3s for 3 are really, in general, solid. When you start getting better than that, it starts to get pretty impressive. Like a 3/4 for 3 starts to be very difficult. Just in the basic math of Magic the Gathering, having a 3/4 for 3 can be in a situation where it's really tough to actually get in front of that. Harnfell Horn of Bounty is the other side of the coin or card. You can pay 5, discard a card, exile the top 2 of your library, and you can play those cards this turn. So a nice little card advantage engine, but not necessarily as busted as they could have made it. You've got to discard a card from your hand, and then those exiled cards, you can't be discarding them, so it keeps it in check, and you've got that 5 mana investment. I think you're already playing the front half of the card. There are going to be some times where you're happy that this back half of the card exists, making it even better to have the option. Breakneck Berserker. This is a surprising common for me. 3 mana, 3/2 with haste. I mean, that is fairly solid in terms of limited. Now, obviously, 3/3 is better, but I mean, 3/2 with haste out of nowhere can add up to be kind of a mess in terms of the combat step, not expecting to have to block that. If you've been swinging with like a 2/4 in the air or something, and all of a sudden now you're on your back foot, couple this with a piece of removal, and it can really swing the game very quickly. Calamity Bearer, 4 casting, costs 3/4. If a giant source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage instead. So this is basically going to do 6 damage for only 4 mana. And this, again, these rares, not super flashy, but like really solid. Like a 6/4 for 4, that's just undercosted. You know what I mean? Like that is a good value, not necessarily something that's mind-blowing and super flashy so far, but cards that you're going to be really happy to have in your pool. And of course, it makes all of your other giants better as well. It's 7 mana. This one's going to be a bit tougher. There are definitely games where you don't actually get to 7 mana. So it does need to be good, and it is a 7/7 trampler, 7/6 trampler, and when it dies, it does 7 damage to a creature an opponent controls chosen at random. A little bit of a Hearthstone feel there. We don't usually see that type of effect on the cards. Choosing creatures at random is not as easy in Paper Magic, especially when people have like tons of tokens, so that's a weird one. That is a weird one. Probably fine, like at 7 mana. 7, 8, 9, like as you get higher in mana, it becomes progressively less likely you're actually going to be able to cast them unless you have some type of ramp in your deck. Cravn Hulk cannot block alone, a 4 casting cost, 4/4 giant. It's pretty fun art too. Yeah, that's a fun card. Won't be fun all the time. Not being able to attack or block alone can be a problem, but this is just blocking, so, I mean, worst case scenario, you've got an aggressive option as a 4/4 for 4, and I would not feel bad about sleeving this one up. The not being able to block does take away significantly, but it's very possible you're going to be on an aggressive deck and not really care as much about that. Crush the Weak deals 2 damage to each creature. If a creature dealt damage this way would die, you exile it instead, and the foretold cost brings it down to just 1 red, so seems really solid. A Pyroclasm that exiles the creatures, you know, the original Pyroclasm, leaving room for the big ones to fight. Yeah, this is going to be one of the stronger cards, I would imagine, clearing the board. And, you know, if you're playing a slower deck where you're actually taking off turn 2 to foretell this, the fact that you're getting a 1 mana sweeper later. I mean, if there was a 1 mana card like this would be like literally vintage playable. So the foretold cost does need to set it up, but again, it is something to keep in mind with all of these. The ones that cost less really make it much less punishing when you don't have that 2-drop, and may even call into question how important 2-drops are for your decks. I mean, we're going to see how this actually plays out in a pre-release setting. Demon Bolt, 2 and a red to do 4 damage to a creature or planeswalker. Again, foretold, bringing this down to 1 red. That's really quality removal. Probably don't need to futz around with the foretell cost very often, but it's something to do as a mana sink as the game progresses. You know, there's plenty of times where you're going to be happy to do that with instants because you can just play it on your opponent's turn. So as long as you don't have to do it literally this turn, it's not that big a deal to foretell something and push it off down the line in a case like this where it doesn't even cost you extra mana overall. Doomscar Titan, a 6 casting cost 4/4. When it enters the battlefield, creatures you control get +1/+0 and haste until end of turn, and we can even reduce the cost of that with a foretell, bringing it down to 5 mana. That's definitely going to be winning some games. Getting the extra 5 damage in from the Doomscar for 5 is already really solid, but pumping your whole team is super dangerous, especially if there's some token support, which we'll see as we go through this. Dragonkin Berserker, 2 casting cost 2/2 with First Strike, and Boast abilities you activate cost 1 less to activate for each dragon you control. And man, when you boast this, you are getting a 5/5 dragon, which is just phenomenal. So again, red maintaining the theme of just undercosted, solid cards here. It's a 2/2 for 2, sure, it can just get cleared with some removal, but if this does create a 5/5, it's an incredible value, and then if it creates multiple 5/5s, how are you not winning that game? Dual Strike, double red, for an instant. When you cast your next instant or sorcery spell with converted mana cost 4 or less, copy it, and you can choose new targets for the copy with a foretell, reducing the cost down to 1. Probably not the best use of your mana just to save there, but could come in handy. And at uncommon, I'm glad this is an uncommon. This would feel bad as a rare, although we have had this type of effect as a rare before. Dwarven Hammer, 2 and a red for an equipment. And this one potentially helps out quite a bit. It's going to give a additional 2 casting costs to get a 2/1 red dwarf creature, and the effect here is +3/+0 and trample with an equip cost of 3. So you're going to be able to pay 3 later on to toss this onto pretty much any creature and make it a decent threat. Even if it's a 1/1, you're going to have a 4/1 token with trample that, you know, can potentially trade, maybe even push through some damage. So this seems like a solid enough piece of equipment compared to a lot of what we've seen. Though all of the equipment in the set does feel pretty expensive. Dwarven reinforcements, 4 casting costs to create 2 1/1 red Berserker tokens, and the Foretell to make that 2 low payments of 2 mana. I mean, if it was a sorcery, this would be a disaster. I'm sorry, and if this was an instant, it would be a disaster because you'd be able to play this mid-combat and just totally wreck an opposing combat step. As it is, you're kind of getting what you pay for. You're getting a couple of 2/1s for 4 mana. The mana cost is right. You are saving on a card that, you know, instead of having 2 cards to make that happen. So this card seems fine enough in aggressive decks. And if there's a way of recurring it, then that advantage kind of curves upwards as well. So when you do have cards that kind of create an effect like that, when you're able to use them repeatedly, that's when they can get really out of hand as well. Fearless Liberator, 2 casting cost 2/1, and you can boast to create a 2/1 dwarf Berserker token. Could be a totally fine turn 3 play. If you don't have something better, you attack with this and then pay the 3 mana. Again, red seems pretty well positioned to fight for the board. Fearless Pup, a 1/1 Ow little pup here. Sorry. First strike. I mean, you're probably just pushing through 1 damage at a time with this. You're generally not going to be wanting to pay 3 mana to pump this mid-combat. It can hold people back, but you're also then holding up your mana, which is also not really where you want to be. So this is the type of card that maybe you end up having to play it in is one of your last cards to make it into your pre-release pool. Doesn't really have any type of constructed application. Frenzied Raider, 2 casting cost 2/2. Whenever you activate a Boast, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Could be a very good aggressive creature in your pre-release pool. A 2 casting cost 3/3, or even larger, starts to get really out of hand, and I'd be happy. I mean, right now I'm actually really liking red in this set. Frostbite, some quality removal here. 2 damage to a creature or planeswalker. If you have 3 snow permanents, it's 3 damage instead. You can't really ask for much more efficient removal than a lightning bolt, and this is going to be a lightning bolt at times. Of course, if you don't need the extra damage, no worries, but there are going to be times where you don't have the snow permanents. So, I mean, shock is probably just like totally fine, just in general for a pre-release pool. Not being able to go to the face is a little bit of a drawback, but being able to be a lightning bolt is pretty nice. We got a mythic here, Goldspan Dragon, 5 casting costs, 4/4 flying haste is really, really good stats. But then whenever it attacks or becomes the target of a spell, create a treasure token, plus your treasure tokens tap for 2 mana instead of 1, and that is a really dangerous mythic. So you're getting this out on turn 5, I should say, swinging, getting 2 treasure token, or they remove it. Either way, you're getting some mana back, potentially 2 mana, and this card seems really strong. I mean, you're certainly going to be playing that on color, and I would be pretty excited about that in my pre-release pool, giving some extra ramp, and the haste and flying is very, very strong. Haggy Mob, 5 casting cost, 5/4. The Boast of doing 1 damage to any target, I think makes this a playable card for your pool. Being able to ping stuff is pretty solid, and you're going to be able to clear small blockers, you're going to be able to kill creatures, occasionally kill players. Immerstorm Raider, 2 casting cost, 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, you may loot, discard a card, and then draw a card. And that seems totally fine. That actually, in a constructed mindset, like this card is better in constructed than it would be in limited, given that you could really take advantage of the looting, but there are generally better options for constructed. We'll see if some type of pauper deck ends up taking advantage of this ETB of discarding and drawing a card, because that's actually a pretty solid magic card right there. Only downside is the tiny butt. getting it pinged to die is certainly a problem. Magda, Brazen, Outlaw, 2 casting cost, 2/1. Other dwarves you control get +1/+0, and whenever a dwarf you control becomes tapped, you create a treasure token, meaning attacking is going to be the easiest way to do that. And you can sacrifice 5 treasures to search your library for an artifact or dragon and put it into the battlefield, and then shuffle your library. So, I mean, that is a really fun card for Commander. Looks like dwarves are getting a ton of support. And yeah, the only issue here is the tiny backside on her. It's really kind of not ideal that she's so easily cleared, but it's a dwarf lord with a huge upside and can potentially just win the game. I mean, there are some really nasty artifacts or dragons that you could be getting. I mean, just off the top of my head, you're just winning the game with Bolas's Citadel, potentially. I mean, I guess you're casting a bunch of dwarves, so it's not quite the same as like a combo deck, but there's some nasty artifacts and dragons that you could get with that. Open the Omen Paths, 3 casting costs. You choose 1, add 2 mana of 1 color to your mana pool, and 2 mana of another color, and then you spend this mana only to cast creature or enchantment spells, so 4 mana for your 3 mana investment in 2 different colors, or creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. And this is not a card that I'd be excited to play with in my pre-release. It's not a creature, it's not removal. The +1/+0 is pretty underwhelming for that mana cost, and I just generally would not be excited about this one. If you're able to, anytime a card is making mana from a casual kind of constructed perspective, if you can replicate or double this effect, then that can start to get interesting. There are definitely ways of doing that in constructed Magic, and a high initial cost like Seething Song, you pay 3 and you get 5. If you're able to cast that card for free, you're not just netting 2 mana, now you're netting 5 mana, which is a big deal. So you don't always want to just think about it in terms of the net mana, because sometimes there are cost reducers or ways that you could get around paying that when you're examining this for some type of constructed fun. Provoke the Trolls, 4 casting cost instant, does 3 damage to any target, and if the creature is dealt damage this way, it gets +5/+0 until end of turn. So, I mean, it's going to be playable. It's a little expensive. I mean, Lightning Bolt is so good, it's hard to put into terms like how incredibly strong the Magic card is. 1 red to do 3 damage to any target is, at instant speed, is phenomenal, to the point where you're actually willing to pay 4 mana for that effect, and it's still playable for a pre-release in all likelihood. Now, you can also get in extra damage by targeting one of your large creatures, and now you're doing 5 damage, which is, not going to happen nearly as often. Generally, you're just going to be killing a creature with this, or occasionally a player. But generally, you're going to be just shooting something down and hoping not to get blown out. I mean, if they protect it and the +5/+0 until end of turn matters, that's at least going to be memorable. Quakebringer, 5 casting cost, 5/4. Your opponents can't gain life, and at the beginning of your upkeep, it does 2 damage to each opponent. This ability triggers only if Quakebringer is on the battlefield, or if Quakebringer is in your graveyard and you control a giant. So you're going to just be able to keep doing 2 per turn, whether this is on the battlefield or the graveyard, as long as you have another giant. And we've got a little bit of a cost reduction with Foretell. Life gain is generally not very good in Magic. I mean, it's much better to do damage to your opponent than to gain life, and it's hard to pin down exactly how much life you'd have to gain off of a card for it to be worth that being the only thing the card does. Like, I don't know, 10, 12 life maybe for like 1 green mana to like gain 12. Maybe that would be a good Magic card, but point is, if you're losing on board, you're gonna lose. Like, if it takes an extra turn or two, it doesn't matter if you drag out a loss and make it take longer to lose. What you want to be able to do is actually impact the board, and life gain generally doesn't. So the effect of this, not amazing. It does stop life link, which is a much bigger issue than just general life gain. But yeah, I mean, there are better cards we've seen so far for the rare and mythic slot. Reckless Crew. I mean, it's a decent clock. The 2 damage unavoidable each turn is not nothing. Reckless Crew, 4 mana, sorcery, create X 2/1 red dwarf berserker tokens, where X is the number of vehicles you control plus the number of equipment. And for each of those tokens, you may attach an equipment you control. So you're basically just bringing in a whole ton of dwarf tokens and just going to have some fun with it, slapping some ridiculous equipment onto these ragtag dwarves. And, you know, that's a commander card right there. Probably not going to be playable at all in your pre-release pool, as there's some real specific requirements to make this even do anything. But, you know, for commander, people will have fun with that. Run Amok, plus for 2 mana, you're going to give a attacking creature +3/+3 and trample until end of turn. It's a solid combat trick. The +3/+3 and trample, I would argue, is worth the extra 1 mana versus just +3/+3. I'd probably rather pay 2 mana to get the trample. And this is most often going to be used to pump an attacking creature. And the only real downside there is you can't use it defensively for a kind of high quality block or to counter removal. So, I mean, the target attacking is probably a bigger issue here than the fact that it costs 2 mana. Rune of Speed, like all the runes, you're going to draw a card with this enters the battlefield. This one gives +1/+0 and haste to either a creature you control or as an additional line of text on your equipment. And haste is a really important ability in Magic. It's the original sales pitch of Magic is that you're a wizard and you're battling your opponent using creatures. Your deck of cards is the spell book. All of the pages are creatures and things that you've encountered in your travels across the multiverse. And, you know, that kind of fell a little bit shy in the early days of Magic, because at the end of it, it was like, oh, well, creatures aren't even like a good way to win. Like, if you can play a creatureless deck, then all of a sudden your opponent's Swords to Plowshares and stuff are dead. So, like, kind of playing the minimum amount of creatures became an optimal strategy. But haste totally turns that on its head. Like, haste is a really good effect, because what it does is it takes those creatures and makes them more like a spell. And you see that with ETBs as well. When something enters the battlefield and actually has an impact on the game, that is so much stronger than just playing a creature, passing the turn, waiting to see if your opponent kills it, untapping, attacking, hoping your opponent doesn't have a trick. There's just so many stages where things can go wrong compared to just, oh, you're tapped out, jam a guy, swing, where you're definitely getting value out of it. Seize the Spoils. 3 casting cost sorcery is an additional cost. To cast a spell, you discard a card, and the effect here is going to be draw 2 cards and create a treasure token. I mean, this is the type of thing that I would play as one of the last cards to make my list. I'd certainly rather play this in a 2-color deck than potentially play 3 colors. And what you're generally going to do with this is hold on to a land that you don't need and get some extra value out of it. The 2 cards and a treasure is pretty reasonable compensation for 3 mana. I mean, you're basically paying 2 mana to draw 2 cards, but you have to discard a card, so you're netting 1 card. But I mean, this is totally fine. It's not great. You're not going to be super excited. There's not a lot of reanimation effects that are going to make great use of that, but overall, that's not an embarrassing card. Not ideal, but not embarrassing. So here we go. Anytime I see gain control of target creature, that's going to be a dangerous card, and this is actually a common as well. So we're going to untap the creature, and until end of turn, it has haste, and whenever this creature deals damage, destroy target equipment attached to it. Very interesting card here. So you're going to be able to steal your opponent's creature and give it haste, which is a really good breakthrough effect. Here at common, usually this effect is at uncommon, like active aggression and stuff. I feel like active treason, there's a bunch of them that are 3 mana uncommons, if I remember correctly. And at common, you're going to have to play against this a lot. Now, that means that when you're trying to get in there and keep back like a single blocker or just like 2 blockers, that can be quickly undone, losing your biggest blocker and having to deal with the fact that it's attacking you. So this is a really high quality card for your pre-release pool. At common, you're likely to see it, and if you're playing red, you're going to want to be sleeving this up. Your opponent's going to be playing with creatures, and the fact that you can also get that added value of smashing their equipment, I mean, that's actually pretty significant. Smashing Success. 3 in a red instant, destroy an artifact or a land. If an artifact is destroyed this way, you create a treasure token. Instant speed land destruction. We have not seen that very often. I mean, it's 4 casting costs. It's a common, so this is potentially a popper card. And yeah, I mean, that's a card. It's not the type of thing I want to play in a pre-release. I generally don't want to be doing things that are not actually affecting the battlefield in terms of creatures. Going after your opponent's mana base can work out, but I mean, very often they can just draw right through it. And if all you're drawing is these type of cards, they don't really do very much. I've certainly seen people win games with just a few creatures out, like a couple of creatures, and then their opponents start blowing up lands and they're never able to handle those creatures. That is a poor strategy. Squash, 5 mana instant to do 6 damage to target creature or planeswalker. Costs 3 less if you have a giant, making it very effective removal if you have a giant or changeling. And I'm thinking I actually sleeve this up literally even if I don't have a giant in my deck. Creature removals at a premium. We're almost all the way through the spoilers. We haven't seen that much of it, so I think this is going to be totally fine. You're probably going to hope to have your giant out because that makes it just really, really efficient. But either way, killing their best creature is going to be worth a card and whatever mana you need to spend, and the fact that it's an instant, even better. Tybalt's Trickery. Now this is one that people have been talking about a lot. So we've got 2 mana, and there's a lot of text on here, so let's parse through it. You're going to counter target spell, and you're going to choose 1, 2, or 3 at random. Its controller mills that many cards, then exiles from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card with a different name than that spell, and then they can cast that card without paying its mana cost. Then they put the exiled card on the bottom of your library in a random order. So what people are talking about is playing this with Cascade, so you can play like a Shardless Agent, Cascade into this, then you can target the Shardless Agent because it's on the stack. You're casting Shardless, the trigger happens, this goes through. Now you target the Shardless Agent, and at that point, you're going to resolve this spell, and then you're going to go until you hit like a Emrakul or something silly. So you're basically able to cascade and make this happen. I mean, it's not good. Everybody's excited about it. I think it's just mostly nonsense. It's basically a meme, but there will be people that will try it. You can probably win at the kitchen table, build a little goofy constructed deck. Not really a commander card, though there are people that play chaotic cards in commander, and I'm sure people will be goofing around with this card. I'm guessing it's going to be just a total bulk rare in the immediate future, but maybe people will be excited about it, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the appetite for casual goofiness is higher than I anticipate. Torolf, God of Fury, forecasting costs 5/4 with trample, is really solid stat lines there. That is a beefy creature, and on top of it, whenever a creature or planeswalker an opponent controls is dealt excess non-combat damage, Torolf deals damage equal to the excess to any other target other than that permanent. So, I mean, if they block with a 1/1, you can... How would we say this? So you have a 4/4 that attacks and they block with a 1/1, then you can have the extra 3 damage. You assign all 4 to that creature, then you can have the extra damage go elsewhere. So it's basically like trampling over beyond. Instead of just going to the player, you can trample to other creatures. So, I mean, that's pretty brutal. Like, that is a gross card. And remember with trample, for those unfamiliar with this little nuance, you can assign as much damage as you want. So if they have a 1/1, even if you have Torolf here, you can assign 1 damage to the 1/1 and 4 damage to their face, or you could assign all 5 to the 1/1, or any mixture thereof. You can just put as much damage as you want towards that 1/1, meaning that the excess damage can be redirected. So don't sell yourself short. You can potentially take this extra damage and fling it toward one of their other creatures and just cause all sorts of chaos. On the backside, we have Torolfs Hammer, a little bit of a throwback to Hammer of Bogarden back in the day from Mirage. Equipped creature has 1 in a red, tap, unattached hammer, and it does 3 damage to any target, and then it goes back to its owner's hand. And, I mean, that's just phenomenal. Like, this is this is a card that you're definitely going to be happy having in your pool. It also gives a creature +3/+0 if it's legendary, so I'd imagine this is going to see play in some commander decks, but for your pre-release pool, this is some high-quality stuff. Tormentor's Helmet, a 1 casting cost, equipped creature gets +1/+1, and whenever equipped creature becomes blocked, it deals 1 damage to the defending player. And here we go. We've got a piece of equipment that we can actually be excited about. This is 1 casting cost, so you can slot it in wherever. It's going to have a lot of synergy with some of the other effects that we've seen in the spoiler, like things that care about casting a second spell. It only costs 1 to equip, making it a prime target for runes and just also passing back and forth. And it's got a nice little upside of whenever the equipped creature becomes blocked, it does 1 damage to the defending player. So even if they do block, you're still pushing through damage. So this is probably the equipment I've been waiting for as I've been doing the spoiler, because this is one that I would actually not feel a little awkward about sleeving up. This is going to give a nice boost. You're talking about having your 2 casting costs, 2/2 creatures. Well, now you can pay 1 more, make it a 3/3, and make all of your creatures a problem. Plus, this is easy to pass back and forth, use it on an attack, pass it off for a blocker. I actually like this card. Tundra Roll, a 3 casting cost snow sorcery that's going to do 4 damage to target creature or planeswalker, and you add colorless for each snow spent to cast this spell, and until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. That was a long pause for me in between this. Very, very good card. 4 damage to a creature or planeswalker. Only problem here is it's a sorcery, but the fact that it's offset by potentially getting 3 mana back, I mean, that is incredibly strong. Tuskeri Firewalker, 3 mana for a 3/2 with Boast, allowing you to exile the top card of your library and play it this turn. At common, that is really strong. I mean, you're basically getting a Dark Confidant with a smaller window, so with a low curve. I mean, this thing is really good, and I would be happy to play this at the pre-release as well. I'm not usually like a red mage, but I'm really impressed with red so far in this set. Vault Robber, 2 mana for a 1/3, pay 1, tap it, exile a creature card from your graveyard to create a treasure token. I mean, that is not a card I'm going to be excited about playing. 1 power for 2 mana. You know, you're generally not going to be winning with this card. It kind of generates mana over the course of a while, but you're investing mana to do it. So, I mean, have fun with it if you want, but if you're measuring your success by winning, this is probably not going to be part of the formula. Surtland Flinger. Now this, I believe we are now, based off of these card numbers, these are going to be in the commander decks. So here we've got a giant Berserker. It's a rare 5 mana for a 4/6, and whenever it attacks, you can sack another creature. And when you do, it deals damage equal to the sacked creature's power to any target. And if the sacked creature was a giant, it deals twice that much damage instead. So commander card. That's about it. Kitchen table magic. Have some fun with that. If it was available for the pre-release, that would be a really strong card, because you can sacrifice and really do some significant damage, especially if it's a giant. I mean, any target, you're just closing the game out potentially with like a quasi haste, and of course it works well with pump spells, giving a creature a bonus and then flinging it. So Bearded Axe, 3 mana for a equipment, and too bad this isn't part of the main set, because this looks like it's more in the usable realm than some of the other stuff we've seen. So for each dwarf equipment or vehicle, the creature's getting +1/+1. So, you know, you're potentially getting a decent little boost here. It's going to be solid in like a dwarf commander deck. Fire Giant's Fury, 2 mana sorcery. Target giant you control gets +2/+2 and gains trample until end of turn. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player this turn, exile that many cards from the top of your library, and you can play those until your next turn. So this is definitely a commander card. You can have some fun with this, making a giant even larger, and then giving it trample, and then exiling a ton of cards and getting to cast those cards. Now, you'll still have to pay for those cards. It's not like it's for free. That would be ridiculous, but you're going to be able to have some fun with this. Gilded Assault Cart, 3 mana for a 5/1 trample vehicle. Only costs 2 to crew it, and you can sacrifice 2 treasures to return it from your graveyard to your hand. Not a whole lot to say about this one. Kind of a long way around as part of a contraption, being able to sacrifice this to get treasures, then sacking the treasures to return it. Maybe there's some type of way of making this work as part of some crazy combo. Yeah, just... I mean, the dwarves will have fun with it, making treasures and returning it, but one of the issues that you'll run into with this type of card, like, it'd probably be fine for kitchen table magic, but once you start playing commander with those higher life totals, these stat lines on the creatures really read as kind of half as much. So a 5/1 creature in commander is kind of like attacking with a 2 or 3 power creature in a regular constructed game, which makes this really not worth the hassle. And Arnie Broken Bow, we are back to the beginning. All right. Well, that is all of the red cards. I hope you enjoyed this. We're doing this for all of the cards for the set. If you like seeing these spoiler reviews, let me know in the comments. A little bit of encouragement will go a long way in ensuring that I continue doing these. As long as some people are enjoying them and find them to be useful, then I will keep doing this because, I mean, I need to look at the set anyways, so might as well make it as productive as possible. Let me know how I can do that for you, and hopefully we'll have some great stories once Kaldheim comes out.